Welcome, age of vintage society. Henry Fonda was the typical Hollywood Golden Age actor that portrayed what he wasn't. He dated sexy women and married the sexiest among them, but it took him 5 tries to finally meet the one that stayed. Henry appeared sunny on the surface, but he struggled within with darkness. The man couldn't love, and didn't learn how to love until late in life. No wonder he and his children didn't get along. This is the story of Henry Fonda's deepest darkness. The hidden truths of Henry Fonda, the actor's private struggles exposed. Americans thought they knew Henry Fonda through the characters he played. Henry was seen as the pillar of justice, the man who could do no wrong, but boy was the American public wrong. Henry had the looks of a saint to go with his on-screen persona. His angelic face and piercing blue eyes convinced many he was unable to commit evil. But Henry wasn't who they thought he was. He wasn't a pillar of justice, and he would admit this himself. The star actor revealed that he was far from what he portrayed in his films, and that the noble characters he portrayed were people he aspired to be. His characters were only masks he wore to delight the audience. After the film, he was back in his skin, and he absolutely hated his skin. Sadly, his hate spread like a virus to affect those around him. His wives and children suffered. Jane and Peter Fonda, 2 Hollywood giants in their own rights, along with their lesser-known but equally successful half-sister from their mum's marriage, didn't have the best of times with Henry as their father. "I was desperate for his attention," said Jane, and it would be a theme that would recur in most of Henry's relationships. The man was aloof and found expressing emotions to be a chore. He lashed out angrily when his children required him to be their dad, and when the women he married needed him to be their husband. His stepdaughter was one of the people that needed him the most, as she suffered an early tragedy in her life, but Henry didn't know how to be vulnerable. The stepdaughter lost her dad, her sister to an accident, and her mother. Fonda's second wife also died. Loss is all she knew, but Henry's aloofness mocked her losses. The handsome actor knew his failings. His 4th wife, Italian Baroness Afdera Franchetti, said, "Henry Fonda is the first to admit he's a lousy husband and an absentee father, but knowing what was wrong was different from actively trying to stop it from continuing. Knowing he was a bad dad didn't make it easier for the children when they wanted to eat dinner with him. Peter Fonda said he and his sister always felt that their father was judging them when they shared the table with him for dinner. His quietness unnerved them and took the fun out of eating as a family. No doubt that they would feel relief when Henry would avoid them to eat in his room. Maybe they were right, their dad could be judging them. At least he judged his daughter up to the point that she became bulimic, and it wasn't only her. 3 of Henry's wives too were bulimic. Notice the pattern? It was like being with Henry was a one-way ticket to getting diagnosed with bulimia. The sexy actor had a notion that people wouldn't love him unless he was perfect, and he let his daughter feel this way too. He told Jane that she wouldn't get people to love her if she didn't look beautiful. The actress, who would grow up to be outspoken, was an adolescent when Henry gave what he thought was a piece of fatherly advice. It affected how the actress saw herself, and it didn't help that he would send the wives he married after his second wife to tell Jane to lose weight. So Jane struggled with her self-image. Her father had unknowingly transferred his curse of poor self-image to his daughter, and she dealt with it until she reached 35 years. The scar Henry inflicted on her psychologically was a lasting one. Peter wasn't better off too. It was as if Henry didn't want him around. By the age of 6, Henry had his son shipped off to boarding school, but before then he gave the young lad the spanking of his life. When Henry returned from his service in the United States Navy during the Second World War, he had some sweets which Peter found and took. Peter didn't think much of what he did, and went to the dining table where Henry was to suck on the sweet. Henry saw Peter, and all hell broke loose. He questioned Peter on how he got this sweet, and he didn't ask nicely. As Peter recalled, Henry had a menacing look on his face which scared him at that point, and he just said he found it. Henry went ballistic and called his young son a liar. As if that wasn't damaging enough, he dragged the young boy and made sure he got the spanking of his life. Peter didn't forget that day, but the psychological effect wasn't as bad as what Henry later did to both him and his sister. Henry kept the nature of his second wife's illness and death both from them. No wonder Jane didn't like him and Peter wasn't a fan. Maybe the embattled actor thought it would be a better thing to do than tell the children that their mother did not die the way they think. Throughout their childhood, Peter and Jane didn't hear the word "I love you" from their dad, but he said it when he had grown older and was much more in touch with his emotions. The older Fonda had fallen into hard times as jobs were no longer coming in, but his kids were there for him in a way that he wasn't for them. Peter offered the man a part in one of the independent films that he was making, so that the man could have money and also feel the thrill of acting. It was during filming that Peter and his son connected on a level that they didn't think they could. Jane also offered her father a part in a movie she was starring in, Golden Pond, and it was for that film that Peter got the acclaim he had always wanted. The Fondas hadn't been close when they were younger, but time helped them fix most of the things that were wrong with their relationship. Thankfully, the resolution came before Henry died, and he could pass with fewer regrets. Henry Fonda was a pitiable man. There is no better way to describe a man who couldn't express himself. He could be angry, happy, or sad, and you wouldn't know. The man would just sit there and zip it, stare, or if he was angry enough, start a passive-aggressive tirade against you, and that was all. His inability to express his emotions limited the roles he played, but this didn't mean he wasn't a great actor. The hunk was an amazing actor. It just came to him, and his skill was so great that he was nicknamed One Take Fonda. One take was all it took for Fonda to deliver a mesmerizing performance. Imagine how he would have been if he could just be a romantic guy. So what made him this way? Why was the great actor out of touch with his emotions? The answer is in his childhood, and his childhood was not the best one. Henry was another lad born into a dysfunctional family, and you know what they say about dysfunctional families. They produce the best acting stars. Henry Fonda was born in Nebraska in 1905 to Christian Scientist parents, which meant they believed too much in the powers of prayer and themselves when they felt ill. This also meant that certain emotional expressions were outlawed in the house. You couldn't cry when you were hurt, and soon, for Fonda, it became not expressing how he felt about anything. It was silence on emotions. Witnessing the lynching and burning of a man, too, didn't help him either. However, the incident will create a side of Fonda that pursued justice through the kind of roles he took. He wasn't overt with it like his kids were, but being a man of justice was an ideal he chased, and it was reflected in the film 12 Angry Men, which was the only film Fonda produced. He vowed not to produce again as the film was a flop, although it later became a cult classic. Growing up in the Fonda household affected Henry to the point that he couldn't talk to girls. Who would have thought? Henry Fonda being a shy man at heart. The only people he interacted with in his childhood were his family, and his sisters were the only girls he talked to. But Fonda would grow up to be an athletic young man who was dutiful to his parents. He pursued the mundane dream of going to college and getting a degree, but life had other plans for him. From aspiring to become a journalist, the Hollywood giant left college and joined the Omaha Community Playhouse due to Dodie Brando's influence. Dodie was Marlon's mum. Along the line, acting had appealed to him, and it was because of one spooky reason. Henry was a delicious-looking 6-foot-tall man, but he didn't know how handsome he was. He loathed himself, and acting gave him a way out. He used acting as a mask behind which to hide his emotions. He abhorred anything that showed his vulnerability, Jane Fonda remarked about her father. Henry spent all of his life running, and acting was one of the ways he ran. Under Dodie's tutelage, Henry was able to grow up to the point that he became too big a fish for the Omaha Community Playhouse. He was ready to compete with other talents. He travelled to New England, where he joined up with the university players to seek his acting fortune. The fortune was slow to come, as there was the Great Depression, but Henry found fortune in Margaret Sullivan, or so he thought. He had a knack for not making the choices that would hurt him. He gave up multiple roles of a lifetime. He didn't take the role of the man with no name in the Western classic The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Clint Eastwood got the part, and look how the film turned out to be. The brilliant actor also declined the lead in It's a Wonderful Life, and instead recommended his friend Jimmy Stewart. The film would become one of Stewart's best films, and one of the greatest films of the time. That's not all. Henry also refused The Sands of Iwo Jima and High Noon, two top-draw Western films, to John Wayne, and he regretted it. Henry called missing out on those films the mistake of my life. If not for that, he was talented and had great luck. He lost on films that would make an actor set for life. Thank goodness he didn't have Bela Lugosi's luck. So, his inability to make the best choices did not only affect his career, but his personal life. It's why it took him 5 times before he could marry right. If he could make the best choice, he would have known Margaret Sullivan wasn't for him. The two of them were night and day. Henry wasn't the expressive type, and Margaret was the extremely expressive type. He got his breakout role in the play The Farmer Takes a Wife, and his real life had drama of its own. There was the time his wife Margaret dumped water all over his head when Henry was complaining to a friend in front of Margaret about her not contributing enough for them to get fireworks for the 4th of July, but they tried to make it work in their own way. The two of them moved to New York, but it wasn't to be. They eventually divorced after 2 years of marriage, but what Henry didn't know was it wasn't because of his failure as a husband alone. Margaret allegedly cheated on him with his best friend, Jimmy Stewart, the man that Henry Fonda truly cared about. Jimmy had some feelings for Margaret, and according to Margaret's daughter, she liked him right back, and the two went further than just likes. They had a full-blown affair that lasted for a year, according to Margaret's daughter. Henry and his best buddy Jimmy would eventually fight in the future, but it wasn't because Henry found out what his friend was doing behind his back. They fought because of their political orientation, and after they made up, they swore not to discuss politics again. Well, Margaret wasn't feeling sexually satisfied by Henry, and it could have been a motivation to cheat. You're 26 years old and still don't know how to make love to a woman, the actress once told Henry, and she wasn't alone in this. Another of Henry's flings, Betty Davis, described her intimate moments with Henry as the easiest 30 seconds I've ever spent with any man. These aren't flattering statements, but they don't matter. Henry would become one of Hollywood's finest Casanovas. There were no pants he couldn't get in, especially when he had his wingman, Jimmy Stewart, by his side. However, when he played the film version of The Farmer Takes a Wife, he was ready to marry again. He married the wealthy Frances Ford Seymour Brokaw, who had just lost her husband. She was emotionally needy, but made the mistake of marrying the most emotionally unavailable man. The pair had 2 children, but life wasn't getting better for them both as a couple. Her neediness and unavailability caused her to spiral. At this point, Fonda had acted in The Grapes of Wrath, which made him one of Hollywood's hottest names and brought him more work. This meant he was away from his family and his wife, but that was still better compared to what he did next. He abandoned his family to go fight in the Second World War. When he returned from the war, he became even more distant. Henry got tired of his wife's mental problems, and rather than provide emotional support for her, he cheated on her with the woman who would become his 3rd wife, Susan Blanchard. When Henry got tired of keeping his affair a secret, he gave his wife a cruel gift. Knowing the woman was suffering from a mental health problem, he told her he wanted to divorce her and told her why. It was a blow Frances never recovered from. The damage to her mind was so much that she was checked into an asylum, but she couldn't bear the pain of losing her husband to another woman, so she decided to end it all. But even at this, Fonda wouldn't say his goodbyes to her, nor would he allow his kids to. He lied to them that it was a heart attack. This was after he didn't let them see her when she was in the asylum. To keep up the lie, his kids were forbidden to read magazines and newspapers, but the secret didn't stay hidden for long. The children found out, and it joined their long lists of the horrible things their father had done to them. Henry didn't care what his children thought. He had his career, and jobs were coming. The star actor's newest marriage also crashed. His newest ex couldn't keep up with Henry's demand for perfection and his aloofness. What did he do next? Did he fix what people complained about him? No, he married a 4th wife, but like his previous marriages, this one also crashed. The man didn't learn it wasn't by marrying a pretty woman, it was by being a good husband. He didn't know how to, so he threw himself into his work until he collapsed. Without acting, He wouldn't have to stop running and deal with his problems. He didn't want to, and asked that a pacemaker be placed in his heart. Also, there were debts he had to repay because of the extravagance of his fourth wife. However, this didn't stop him from marrying the fifth time, but this time, against all odds, he and his newest bride remained together. Eventually work dried up and Henry had to live in his skin. Then the full extent of his failures struck him, but his children were magnanimous. They didn't spite him or rub their success in his face. Instead, they helped him find work and remain an actor until the very end. It was through acting that Henry discovered his heart and expressed feelings trapped inside. Henry cried and felt human. His children helped him become in tune with his emotions. But they wouldn't be with their rebranded dad for long. Henry died, but he wasn't alone when he passed. Besides family life, women were not keen on Henry Fonda's performance in bed. Not like with Warren Beatty's. Do you think Warren Beatty slept with 13,000 women? Watch this video.